we will go to item 11, and this is an interesting paper, members. Tony Reedy is the author of it, and it's great to see some red tape slashed, and appropriately so. And it's a proposed plan change on temporary activities. Look, I'll move the motions that are on page 124. Councillor Cooper, this crosses over into your regulatory area. Would you like to second?
Yes.
Thank you. And Tony, tell us the good news.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mayor and councillors. I've actually has a presentation just to run through quickly, which summarises what the changes are about. And I'll just take you through that. Oh, sorry, I've gone too far. So just in terms of temporary activities, they include festival events, concerts, parades, sporting events, and also filming. And they're managed under both the unitary plan and the trading and events in public places bylaw. That's currently subject to review, the bylaw. There's also the Film Auckland Protocol as well, which provides guidelines on filming activities. So the unitary plan's objectives and policies talk about temporary activities, how they can contribute to a vibrant city, and enhance the well-being of communities. At the same time, however, the objectives and policies also talk about mitigating adverse effects on amenity values, in particular noise, traffic, communities and the natural environments. Historic heritage places and sites and places of significance to mana whenua. So the plan change doesn't alter these objectives and policies, it just tweaks the standards in a couple of areas. And those areas are to make it a bit easier for event organisers to put on events without having to go through a resource consent, and I'll touch on those areas shortly. So we've had a number of issues raised by a couple of council departments and also AT in terms of the temporary activity standards, that they're overly onerous in a couple of areas and they're triggering the need for these resource consents. There was another issue raised in terms of temporary activities on sites and places of significance to mana whenua. At the moment, any temporary activity on such a place is restricted discretionary activity, needs a resource consent. At the same time, we've also identified a gap in the coastal temporary activity provisions in terms of the noise requirements there, and we're using this opportunity just to fill that gap and to tweak another anomaly in the activity table as well. And there was also an issue raised in terms of temporary emergency works, which we feel are adequately covered under the RMA or can be addressed under the review of the RMA in over the next year or two. So that we've come down to two proposed changes to the temporary activity standards and one change to the Pukekohe Park precinct. And so in terms of those standards, the changes, so we're requiring a traffic management plan. A traffic management plan is required already in for an event in a rural or future urban zone where more than 500 vehicles movements are generated. That's tagged to a resource consent requirement, however, so we're removing that resource consent requirement but still having the requirement for a traffic management plan. And so it becomes a permitted activity standard instead of a trigger for a resource consent. So the end result's the same. Also under the bylaw, there's the ability to require a traffic management plan in any case. So there's a little bit of a duplication there. In terms of the temporary activity standards themselves, we're increasing the duration of those slightly. Those events that are defined as noise events, that is, they exceed the noise standards for that particular zone from 6 hours to 8 hours. And there's a slight tweak to the Pukekohe Park precinct in terms of Anzac Day, where Anzac Day lands on a Saturday, and that's only once every 6 years with leap year. They would be able to start on a Saturday afternoon. At the moment, that the precinct rules out Anzac Day totally, so it gives them half a day on Anzac Day. Again, it's a fairly small change, but it provides a bit more flexibility. And then, as I mentioned, there's two additional minor changes to address some anomalies. That's in the coastal temporary activity provisions and also in the temporary activity table itself. They are outlined in the report. There are a couple of areas we're recommending no change, and that's to the temporary activities on sites and places of significance to mana whenua, and also the temporary emergency works. The former, as I mentioned, requires a restricted activity resource consent, and we believe that's the appropriate process at this point in time. And the latter one, as I mentioned, the review of the RMA is probably the most appropriate forum to address that issue. And that's a brief summary, Mr. Chair, of the changes proposed. I have Marie Jenkins from ATEED listening in as well, and I think Liesl Dawson from ATEED was also going to listen, but she may have another commitment if there are any questions of ATEED.
Okay, thank you. And that's Auckland Transport as opposed to ATEED?
ATEED.
No,
yeah.
You said ATEED.
Yes, ATEED.
Who actually raised some of these issues. I thought you were talking about the traffic management issues and you mentioned ATEED, but that's fine, that's clear. Are there questions? Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, thank you. And given ATEED does a Screen Auckland plan, etc., is there any, do they want to comment on this and how it affects our ability to allow filmmaking? Because there have been some issues around that and consenting and plan changes or in the plan and our consenting. So I just guess I want to be reassured that this doesn't hinder our filmmaking ability in Auckland, or whether it makes it better, or is it just neutral? I guess those are my issues.
Tony, I have to go back to you on that because we don't have ATEED on the call.
Okay.
Okay, we don't. Right.
So it improves it for filmmaking, particularly the traffic management plan in rural areas. Often they've advised us with the film crew and the various people involved in filmmaking, you can get over 500 vehicle movements. And at the moment, resource consent would be required. So this enables them to prepare a traffic management plan and to go ahead with the filming without having to go through the resource consent process. They were the ones that raised the issue on sites and places of significance to mana whenua, but we believe the resource consent process is the appropriate process at this point in time. They are sites with multiple values to multiple iwi, and it's difficult through a broad brush plan change to address those sort of issues.
So that would give a bit more discretion around that rather than just one blanket role on the unitary plan?
There's the opportunity on sites and places of significance to apply for a resource consent, and you can bundle together a number of different activities. So, for example, we've used an example of Queen Street, where there is a site of significance along Queen Street. You could prepare a resource consent and cover a number of different temporary activities. So that's probably the most appropriate process.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Are there other questions or comments, members? I just noticed, Tony, reading through it last night, and thank you for the attachments, quite a lot of quite dense information there. Now, you've got a list under paragraph 9, and if I go to the top of 125, I just made this assumption that it included markets, and then I read on to discover that markets are excluded. Why are markets excluded?
When the unitary plan was prepared, that was a deliberate choice to provide them with a separate definition. And therefore take them out of the temporary activities definition. I'm not sure, I can't recall the rationale at that point in time. It was handled by a different person working on the definitions, but we've ended up with markets not being in that definition. So they often provided for separately in the activity tables.
Yeah. So is it onerous for an applicant to set up a market? I mean, is it something that we should have looked at or need to look at?
It hasn't been flagged as an issue, and a lot of the business, it depends where the location of the market is, obviously, but in a lot of the business zones are permitted activities, so it's not an issue there.
Okay. Thank you. Good word at that. Just in terms of noise and extending the noise by, what was it, the one or 2 hours?
By 2 hours.
2 hours. and citing packing in and packing out for concerts as a classic example.
Yep.
Packing out, concerts are turned around almost immediately, like the pack outs happen immediately. The riggers come in and they don't use rubber mallets or anything like that. It's clanky, it's noisy. I'm just thinking of communities. I know that it's recently been highlighted in a resource consent application that's in at the moment and live. I won't go into that detail, but have you taken into account the type of noise that occurs in the pack in and pack out, scaffolding, etc.?
Yes, that's been addressed in Plan Change 14, an earlier plan change, which addressed the pack in and pack out issues, and they've aligned the the construction noise standards to the pack in and pack out now. So they're covered. It's the same standards that would apply to someone constructing a building.
Okay.
Because the pack in and pack out was an issue raised by ATs.
Okay.
I think it's we've covered that in the report as well.
Now, we do have AT'd, is it Marie on the line?
Marie, yeah.
From AT'd. Would you like to pose your question again, Councillor Cooper?
Hello, I was just asking around the ability, ease of filming, whether these unitary plan changes will address some of Screen Auckland's concerns and maybe the screen industry concerns.
Marie, did you hear that?
Yes, I did. Yep, thank you. Yes, they will address the concerns that we have. Yep. It will go quite, especially the vehicle movements one will really assist a lot of the locations, the rural locations, to get the larger productions in and out more effectively.
And is there anything else that we can do to make this easier? I know sometimes the sign-off in the local areas is tricky. Is there another avenue that needs to be addressed rather than unitary plan change?
In regards to the sign-off for the permit applications?
Yeah, I think that's it, permit. Yeah,
Sorry.
so permit applications,
yeah.
especially for local areas through local boards.
Yeah, I mean, we do have challenges from the film industry in regards to kind of having 21 local boards and the short timeframes with filming. I have been working on a landowner approval workstream project that is separate to this to try and ease some of those pain points a little bit. But that is really kind of probably more process rather than Auckland Unitary Plan focused.
Thank you. That's all right. I won't steer off course then. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Marie. And one last one from me, Tony. Under the list at 125, would that include open streets events? They're not identified, but of course we never thought about identifying open streets events before as temporary activities.
Yeah, it includes events in public places, which would include the streets as well.
That will cover it, because
Yes.
the consenting there's a whole lot of things that are quite onerous to create an open street event. Okay, are there any other questions?
Just a comment.
Oh, Councillor Henderson?
Sorry, just a comment, Chair, if that's okay. I just wanted to tautoko Councillor Cooper's points. I think they're fantastic, and just wanted to add that we should be enabling our film industry as much as we can in this council. They're the lifeblood of Waitakite's business, so thank you.
Thank you. Well, look, from my point of view, when I read this report, on the back of the rainwater tanks and our relook at the consenting requirements there and how onerous it was, and taking some red tape and cost out of the equation there to enable better outcomes. This is another great example. I have to take my hat off to the team, Tony, your team, for highlighting this and recommending that we progress a plan change to effectively get out of the way, for Auckland Council to get out of the way and enable things to happen and eliminate the quite onerous barriers. Of course, these things they're littered throughout our structure, but let's pick them off one by one. Let's go through and find what we don't need to live with. that creates a lot of cost. And as we travel through this COVID world, we're going to have to bring life to the city and bring people to events and into public places, and we're going to have to do that quite quickly. And we can't find ourselves falling over the hurdle of, the unnecessary red tape and costs. So that's great to see. So my hat's off to the team and ATEED, Marie at ATEED, for bringing this to us. It's moved by Councillor Cooper and it's seconded by myself. Are there any other comments to make? We'll put it to the vote then. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Next one is item 12, pretty straightforward. Councillor Bartley, would you like to move that one?
Yes.
Do I have a second, please? I'll second then. And that's the summary of Planning Committee information, the memos, etc. And I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no.
Aye.
Declare that carried. Thank you, members. Nothing under 13, which takes us to the procedural motion to allow us to go to the confidential section. So I'll move that procedural motion. Deputy Chair will second. Thank you. All those in favour say aye.
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 Contrary, no. Declare that carried. And we'll just take a minute and we'll just check that only those that need to be are on the